So today is really about learning from the limitations and challenges that our expert panelists and speakers have faced in a wide variety of climate change adaptation projects, and how we as a community of practitioners can learn from and adapt to those challenges. So before I introduce our first speaker this morning, I'd like to introduce our two co-chairs for today's forum, Carolyn Norkowitz, who is Regional Coordinator of the Municipal Vulnerability Program for Greater Boston, and Indrani Ghosh, the Resilience Senior Technical Leader at Weston and Sampson. Carolyn and Indrani have worked very hard over the last several months to frame this topic, to coordinate speakers, to organize the agenda. Unfortunately, Indrani herself could not be with us today, so I'm stepping in to help with the program introduction and the speaker introductions. So first up today for speakers, we have Maya Mansfield and Oleander Stone, both from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, who will be discussing lessons that they've learned at the state and local levels here in Massachusetts. Maya is the Assistant Secretary of Climate Resilience at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. In this role, she co-leads the implementation of the State Hazard Mitigation and Climate Adaptation Plan and the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, or the MVP program. Prior to this, she launched and led the Climate Ready Boston initiative for the city of Boston. And Oleander is the Deputy Director of Climate Equity and Environmental Justice at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Prior to this, they served as the Regional Coordinator for the Berkshires and Hill Towns for the MVP program and focused on the development of the new MVP 2.0 process, which was informed by some of these lessons learned that we're talking about this morning. Oleander has a background in geologic carbon sequestration and a long history of working in agriculture and native habitat restoration. Has 23 years of water resources experience with government agencies like NREL, but also with private consulting. He provides strategic planning and research in water, wastewater, and alternative water treatment, and integrated water resources assessments to create high-impact research programs, projects, and partnerships. He's authored more than 50 publications in his field, currently serves as an associate editor for the Journal of Sustainable Water in the Built Environment. So welcome, Scott, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Let me share the screen here. All right, how was that? Can you see it okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks for having me, everyone. That was already great presentations, and I think you'll see a lot of themes that that coincide between all of these that are being presented. I will say, first of all, as a current government employee, I have to say that what I'm going to present to you all today, that is really my own views, and they do not represent the Department of Energy or the US government in any way. And so in that regard, I am responsible for all of those things that you'll see in here. Do not be calling the Director of the Department of Energy with regards to complaints if you don't like it, or if you do like it. I'll take all of those accolades if you'll send them my way. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about strategy for water supply, water treatment, and adaptation in response to climate change and decarbonization goals. A lot of those have really been set by the current administration. Oh, by the way, if I would be there in person, it would have been great. I would have loved to it. I'm coming to you from not so sunny Colorado right now. In fact, I think we're getting our first snow in the mountains, so yay for the ski resorts. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the water energy nexus and how we think a bit about that, at least from my perspective. I'll talk a little bit about the impacts of climate change on our water systems and how we're adapting to that. Discuss a little bit about beneficial capture and use, and then really go into some of the regulatory landscape for that, goods and bads, and then really talk about where the research is taking us and how we might be able to change the paradigm for some of our approaches that we're currently taking. As you all know, climate change is certainly happening. We can see it in, for instance, this kind of data that comes from both NOAA, the graphic on the left that you see on your screen showing that this 30-year normal average is increased from the early 900s to present, where most of our country is experiencing a positive increase in temperature. And then on the right, showing the information from NASA that we had our hottest summer on record, and that you'll see highlighted there the months of June, July, and August combined to nearly a half a degree Fahrenheit increase, warmer than any other summer in NASA's record, 2.1 degrees warmer than average summer between 1951 and 1980. So in that 30-year period. So again, we know that this is happening. The data is certainly supporting that. How it happens, where it happens, of course, is a little bit different all over the US and the world. So what does that mean for the water energy nexus? I wanted to point out a few things on this. So this graphic is kind of showing how our carbon dioxide emissions are connected with our energy sources. On the top, you see our renewable sources that are, for the most part, not contributing to carbon dioxide emissions, but our petroleum-based systems and coal-based systems, of course, are, with natural gas, coal, and petroleum providing most of that. Notice that natural gas and coal are primarily used for electricity generation. Meanwhile, petroleum is really supporting that transportation portion of the carbon dioxide, and then of course there's parts that are used for industrial, commercial, and residential. Again, natural gas is one that often we have piped directly into our home for heating, boilers, and certainly cooktops, etc. On the left, you'll see that I'm showing some of these numbers. So energy use in 2021 for coal actually increased by 14% and petroleum by 9%. So you might ask why that is. Well, while natural gas had been the cheaper source, it increased in price. So then, of course, substitutions became more popular. So coal and petroleum then became a bigger part of that. Another aspect of this I'd like to highlight is the water side of this. So now I'm showing on the graphic where we're bringing in not just that energy production, but that water use as a part of this. So I'm just pointing out here real quick that thermoelectric cooling is one of the biggest uses, for instance, for our freshwater sources. Agriculture, our second, and then the public supply, which is a combination of residential, commercial, industrial, makes up that third largest use of our surface water sources. And of course, agricultural and the thermoelectric use a fair bit of groundwater as well, or even saline surface water. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that we really do need to think about how our energy and water systems connect, because there is definitely an integration there. Interestingly, adding to the graphic or the numbers on the left, 20% increase in solar and 11% increase in wind in 2021. However, there was a 12% decrease in hydro. And you might ask, well, why would you decrease hydro? That is one of our systems that provide a decarbonized source of energy. And the reason was drought. Drought led to the reduced use of hydroelectric during the year of 2021. So clearly our systems are closely connected between both our water systems for water for energy and our energy for water. Interestingly, and this is where I will dip my toe just a tiny bit into the politics of things. You might see that Texas complains a lot about having renewable energy supplies there, but they actually have the greatest supply of both wind and solar across the US. And maybe that's partly because of their great location for sunshine and their ample wind that they have, so that they're able to put those there, and a lot of unused land where they can deploy those systems up there. And then I just point Massachusetts down there lower. Obviously, there you can't necessarily compare those because there's less opportunity for applying those two technologies in Massachusetts. So in response to that, we've been talking about how adaptation plans and our means of addressing risk for climate change has already been happening. Here's just a couple of examples here where I have the EPA climate adaptation plan shown on the left, the Department of Energy in the center, and Boston's climate ready Boston plan on the right. I will note to the Northeast accolades here that of all of these three, that Boston's was first in time in terms of thinking about this and preparing for it. And I think that from what I've seen in all of the reports and information, that that the Boston area is certainly planning their coastal resilience better than most locations with maps, et cetera, and in that planning process. So when we think about that, the impacts of the climate, we look at things like extreme weather, of course, heat waves, floods, droughts. Increased air pollution is associated with those increased temperatures and sea level rise. Being a coastal community, it's certainly one that I'm sure you all are facing. Maybe not in Western Mass so much, but the coastal communities are certainly having to deal with this. Leads to different impacts like urban heat island effect, infrastructure damage and failure, and then other aspects such as forced displacement, increased pressures on mental health, increased hunger and poor nutrition, and even increased disease and mortality that are associated with these. One thing I wanted to point out here on the graphics on the right is that that heat was the cause of more deaths between the 30-year period between roughly 2000 and 20-year period between 2000 to 2020 than any other hazard. So this is something that is a direct connection with those increases in temperatures that I highlighted previously. So the adaptations that we're doing, at least from both a water perspective, but other perspectives as well, are climate smart building. We're really starting to consider those projections for climate change and how we can adapt our infrastructure for that. We're using different stormwater management techniques like green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, which have been shown to be effective from literature and actual use. Living shorelines and beneficial use of dredge material. Again, that's more on the coastal side of things. Investing in new kinds of cooling techniques and efficiency in those cooling techniques. Addressing some of those social issues that we heard from before in terms of the vulnerable populations, and considering how we best deal with and can manage those situations where this equity of our unhoused can be considered, for instance, in that aspect, and then embracing urban growth with clean energy solutions. On the right, you'll see just some various reports where the different techniques that are being advocated. So, for instance, nature-based solutions and the use of dredge materials. Army Corps of Engineers, for instance, has really got behind this and is providing some guidance on this, including their own group that does what they call engineering with nature, which is the same as what they consider a nature-based solution. And then other aspects of green infrastructure in our buildings, for instance, green roofs and blue roofs, et cetera. I don't want to leave out the agricultural side of things because that's incredibly important. As I mentioned before, that one of the second largest use for water is agriculture. So they're dealing with things like annual average seasonal air temperatures are increasing. That's shifting the seasons of growth. The number of hot days and hot nights are increasing, which it then affects a number of things, including the soil health. And then, of course, precipitation patterns are changing as well with more increased extreme events, which can, for instance, with hailstorms, which we deal with a fair bit here in the West, can damage crops and other infrastructure, increased flooding damage, which we've seen all over the US this summer, wind and storm hazards increasing. Here's one of the effects of the warmer nights is that the soil moisture stress is increased because of the increased evapotranspiration that occurs during the nighttime, and even changes in weed species distribution and pest and disease pressures that go along with that. The type of adaptations that our agricultural and farming and ranching community have already adapted to are things like changing the crops, the timing and location of those, managing the practices for water supply and demand separately, really considering how that demand does impact, or the supply does impact the demand, and vice versa. Coming at pest management with integrated pest management approaches, and being able to consider what they're using for their management of pests and invasive species. Diversifying crops and the species, and how they rotate those crops. Again, integrating livestock with crop production, and then the management of the intensity of the storms with peak flow, runoff velocity, and soil erosion. Really, their USDA has a goal of focusing on improving soil quality overall. So there's numerous guidance documents to provide information on and support on how farmers and ranchers can improve the soil water quality. And of course, one of the aspects of trying to deal with all of these changes are often the nutrients and fertilizers are used to help increase the crop yields in times of stress, and of course also pesticide use is increasing to try to mitigate some of those increase in pests and disease. And so how to minimize those impacts and use fertilizers and pesticides in the most efficient way to avoid overuse of those, and then implementing more efficient practices in general. So one of the challenges with climate change and the impacts is that they can be significant and often difficult to predict. So I just have a numerous examples here. One is the most recent one in August here of Maui, and I'm not sure how much it made it into the news, but the Maui firefighters had significant challenges in being able to put out fires because they both lost power, which didn't allow them to pump water, for instance, even out of the hydrants, as well as they had pipes and pipe fittings that were melted and ended up causing a lot of leakage. So then they lost pressure even within those pipes. Consequently, they were challenged greatly in terms of being able to use any of their emergency water system to be able to put out those fires. And now the aftermath also is going to be a costly cleanup, just because they have no certified landfills that can take the hazardous waste of all this material that remains. And so that, again, creates another environmental hazard that is due to the fires there that were, again, it's kind of an outcome of the drought that they were having there. Boston has had its own challenges with, as shown in the middle here, 21 events that triggered federal or state disaster declarations. And then other things that are happening, for instance, in the West and Midwest. I think you all might have been impacted by the smoke from the fires that were in Canada. And we've had fires here in Colorado and numerous other fires out West, Washington State and California. And these have some huge impacts on our water supply reservoirs, our water treatment systems, and even, both from a sedimentary issue with sediments accumulating in our reservoirs, and chemicals and other aspects of the fire treatment side of things. So this creates a huge havoc in our water supply systems. And that bottom left is just showing that there's in California, for instance, with the Paradise Fire, that they found that the plastic pipe system afterwards had to be replaced because it was contributing pollutants within the drinking water that were leaching out due to the heating of those pipes during that fire itself. So there's a lot of aspects of climate change that we just can't predict and have to adapt to, and really become quite costly in our management of these systems. Some of the things that have been done in the U.S. include, for instance, in California, one of the issues they've been struggling with is drought again, and so they have created in their drainage systems these these systems that they call spreading grounds. They're basically gigantic infiltration systems. And so if you see that middle graphic that says surface spreading there, that is the spreading ground which infiltrates that captured water from what would be a potential flood event into their shallow and deep aquifers. They've been using some stormwater practices that are they term them dry wells, but they're basically infiltration practices that have multiple purposes. One is to support their shallow groundwater, but also to provide a seawater barrier where if they can infiltrate enough of that, it can reduce the amount of saline water that gets into their aquifers as they're pumping their groundwater. They do use primarily groundwater supplies there, but the new approach that they're using there, you'll see this in the bottom left, is their alternative water supplies where they're using reclaimed water, which is you'll see these purple pipes in two of the graphics there. The reclaimed water is plumbed through a different colored system so that it's easily identifiable. And on the upper right, showing the examples of industrial reuse, where typically a lot of the industrial waters are just being discharged to our receiving streams, but there's ways that we can take that industrial water and provide treatment and then reuse of that. Thankfully, EPA has given us some tools to be able to do this better. So I asked whether we can capture, use, reuse, and recover water in some of these examples that I've just shown. And I guess my quick response is perhaps, mostly, it depends. The EPA has provided this tool, this Reuse Explorer, from the Water Reuse Action Plan, a group that has collectively done a fantastic job of bringing together a lot of resources to be able to investigate whether and how you might do water reuse. Of course, the biggest aspect of this is that the regulations are important. They really do matter. And so I was going to just hit on a couple of these things rather quickly here. Here's an example. Again, this is coming from the Water Reuse Action Plan, where they're looking at on-site non-potable water and where the regulations permit this. Generally, you can see across the U.S. that on-site non-potable water reuse is only possible in a handful of states. Here's water reuse regulations or guidelines for landscaping. So do the guidelines exist for being able to reuse water for landscaping? Much more common. Again, this is often either in the purple pipes or other systems that are directly taking either municipal treated water and using it for irrigation or other types of collected water, for instance, even in stormwater ponds, et cetera. Here's centralized non-potable water reuse. So that now we're talking about a centralized system, and I'll get into a little bit more of centralized versus decentralized in a few slides. But again, quite a number of states do allow this. But when we look at potable water reuse regulations or guidelines, there's fewer that allow this. And I will say that this is some of this is it allowed, or are there regulations or guidelines? Yes. Is it actively being done? Perhaps not in all. As an example, for the state of Colorado, we have regulations that allow direct potable reuse of wastewater, thanks to our active academic community that has developed these systems that have demonstrated great capabilities to be able to reuse black water. But at the same time, the regulations exist. There's only one that's in place right now that is actually a functional system that's using black water. Another, I think, example that is very informative from a rainwater harvesting reuse aspect is Austin, Texas. And I've pulled this out because I think this is pretty interesting that they've just recently passed one of their laws within the city that goes in effect on December 1st of this year, where any development that's over 250,000 gross square feet or greater must put in rainwater harvesting for or gray water reuse within the building for toilet urinal flushing, laundry, irrigation, and cooling. This is the first I've seen within the U.S. where a development code is requiring the use of water, both from a rainwater or gray water aspect. I want to hit on this just as a graphic to kind of talk about shifting into the water systems research. And so this is where a lot of my emphasis is. And so you can see that we have different various water sources on the left-hand side of this graphic. And I want to call out this fit for purpose benefit or use on the right-hand side. And there's numerous benefits that I've already mentioned, from agricultural to irrigation to internal potable use. And those are important, and especially the fit for purpose benefit, because that often determines the type of treatment that's done. But what I want to focus on the next few slides are this aspect here of water quality treatment, the treatment system that's used within this. And this treatment system can be, as simple as a passive treatment, a treatment train, or, for instance, chemical dosing to make a potable reuse possible. My function in this is really looking at the energy use. Can we use renewables in a lot of this treatment train, the materials that we're using? So we're looking at the life cycle cost analysis of this, and most importantly, the waste. Oftentimes when we're looking at waste products, everything from biosolids to saline brines, the cost of disposal of that waste is a huge factor in the overall costs of the treatment technologies and the water that's produced for this. I think importantly, the aspects that I've kind of focused on before, certainly from a water supply, are the water security and water resilience that comes from reuse. But circular economy is also an important part of it. Of course, in the current administration, decarbonization is a real focus, and I think an important one that's honestly getting some decent funding now from the BIL and IRA, and that is been the decarbonization of these systems has been a major focus for the Department of Energy. And probably most importantly, the environment and social equity that goes along with how these systems are used, placed, and operated and maintained. So the research is really going towards this. What I've seen, and I think there's the most opportunity, is in this what I'm calling MAD or MAD, if you add the extra A in there. So there's this journal article that came out recently that talks about MAD water, and it's integrating modular, adaptive, and decentralized water systems. And the modular really is hitting on that fit for purpose, treating only to the need that's necessary for the use, and making it replicable, and being able to expand the use, and often making it mobile so that it can be used from one location to another. The adaptive part, that it can quickly and responsibly be modified to meet immediate needs, and then decentralized, meaning that it's dispersed or more distributed. And of course, I added this other A in there, which I put as autonomous. One of the ways that we see that the regulatory environment is more accepting of these systems is while they sometimes distrust the technologies that do autonomous operations, the sensors, and the sensors, by the way, are getting cheaper and cheaper by the day, but the sensor technology and the operations of these things, if they can be autonomously run, and perhaps more importantly, shut down if there is an upset or sensors technologies detect that things are not okay. When I've been talking with numerous regulators, they've said that they felt more comfortable if these systems could shut themselves down if that was detected. And so that autonomous operation actually does provide some adaptation to that risk that could come with dispersed or other distributed type of systems. And so that has made them that approach more favorable. I'm going to hit real quick on this group called the National Alliance for Water Innovation, or NAWI. This is a DOE-funded program. It's the largest investment in desalination and water reuse since the 1960s. It was funded by $110 million from Department of Energy's Advanced Manufacturing Office. Includes numerous university, industry, and national lab members, several nonprofits, and utilities. 23 million cost share that came primarily from the state of California, where they're investing heavily in desalination aspects. And the goal is to get 75% reduction in cost and energy of beneficial use of non-traditional waters. So one of the major aspects is to try to get the cost of water produced through either desalination or water reuse to near parity with our traditional water supplies. So NAWI's purpose then is doing just exactly what we're talking about for this in terms of adapting for a changing planet, securing water supplies from non-traditional waters, because we know that those will have to be part of a growing portfolio for water supply, and then reducing the costs and carbon intensity of these types of treatment systems. This is a graphic kind of demonstrating this, where the levelized cost of water, which is the metric that we're using within NAWI, is to bring that total cost, both from treatment and transportation costs, down again to hopefully a parity with our traditional water supplies. And we're doing this through a process that's looking at autonomous approaches, precise approaches, trying to become more resilient with our types of treatment, and then intensified systems, modular systems, and electrified systems. Again, electrified lends itself to better use renewable energy. This change then to a more distributed system really helps us with more flexibility. So from a planning perspective, it changes that lead time to a shorter lead time. From a design perspective, I mentioned the term modular in this, and so it's taking it from every system as a custom design to something that is more something that can be manufactured and used and tweaked locally to be able to be put in place. And then that cost of the system ends up becoming much less. So we're thinking about these distributed systems as really providing a better approach in the future for being able to do water treatment and for water supply, and even on a water treatment side or wastewater treatment side as well. So from my research perspective and where I think things are going, this integrated water systems research is looking at how we can improve those treatment systems, how we can operate those systems from a power and pumping perspective, reducing, for instance, pressures in systems and with the ability to use renewable energies. Thinking about that fit for purpose use as a way to govern what kind of treatment practices we're putting in. So looking at those treatment trains and how we can really organize our treatment trains where we're using, for instance, storage both on the upstream and downstream sides, and maybe even in-process storage, along with time of use operations, again, using these decentralized systems to develop more efficient treatment of these systems. As an example, the city of Houston, one of our largest cities in terms of a footprint, a very sprawling city, has done an evaluation of, well, Rice University did an evaluation of their system, and they found that by putting in more distributed infrastructure for their water treatment and wastewater treatment, that they could actually really achieve a 50% rate of return on those investments, and have a better ability to adapt to, for instance, the impacts of climate change on our infrastructure, things like our large centralized systems and their ability to adapt to, where the needs are, and actually the ability to maintain these large centralized infrastructure systems over the long term, so that then they're operated in a smaller manner and can be, for instance, leaks and other aspects of the infrastructure can be detected in a much better way because it ends up being a smaller system.
Scott, I just want to give you a quick time check here. We're approaching 10:30.
Perfect. I'm right there with you. So in conclusion, we're seeing that capture and reuse must be a part of our resilient water portfolio. Is it being done well with our regulatory landscape? Not yet, but we're improving. It's still complex, and we're trying to work out things within the regulatory environment. Again, perhaps things like autonomous controls can help with that. I think disruptive technologies, for instance, looking at a different approach that may be alternative to centralized systems can improve this. Some of the aspects that were mentioned in the previous presentation about convergence research, which means bringing in social and economic aspects and researchers within this can help better solve these systems rather than just considering just the engineers, for instance, or just the planners. That really needs to be a part of the equation. And so I think that that team that was developing that MAD research, for instance, includes a number of social and economic contributions. And then taking a holistic approach and understanding, so that we're looking at these systems and seeing where they can be most efficient, where if it makes sense to divide or to maintain that centralized system, and needs to be considered. With that, Kelly, I think I am complete with this and would be happy to entertain questions if we have any time, or we can do that during the discussion.
All right, thanks so much, Scott. That was a great talk on the intersection of water reuse and climate adaptation and resilience. We have a handful of great questions in the chat, but I think we will save those for the panel discussion. Welcome back from the break, everyone. We have one more speaker today before we transition to a panel discussion. So our last speaker of the morning is Robyn DeYoung, who will be talking to us about funding and technical assistance for climate resilient communities. Robyn is US EPA's Green Infrastructure Lead in the Office of Water. 20 years ago, she actually started her professional career at the EBC, so come full circle. She was at the time assisting the membership director to connect local policymakers and private businesses. Robyn graduated from Boston University with a master's degree in energy and environmental analysis, and before she moved to Columbus, Ohio, and joined Ohio EPA. For the past 12 years, she's been at US EPA, developing technical and policy resources that promote clean energy, green infrastructure adoption, and climate adaptation strategies. Welcome, Robyn. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'll turn things over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I am going to share my presentation here. How does that look?
Looks perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Yeah, when I got the invitation to speak for the Environmental Business Council, I chuckled a little bit because I'm like, wow, this is my first job while I was a senior in college at Boston University. And so it is kind of fun to come full circle as the National Green Infrastructure Lead at EPA speaking at this organization. So thanks for having me today. What's really important at EPA for us is to help communities become more sustainable and resilient. And you've already heard from the speakers about what climate change's impacts are doing to our communities with additional precipitation events and hazards and wildfires. And so luckily today, I'm going to talk about the funding and other technical assistance resources that we have to help communities be more sustainable and resilient in a changing world. First, I wanted to give a plug to some of our resources, because if the people and if the public doesn't understand what the problem is, then they might not take the action necessary on a personal level or even at a community level. And so, I'm in the stormwater management program at EPA in the Office of Wastewater Management. So, our focus is on how to keep our surface waters clean. And so doing this through our stormwater smart communication materials to increase awareness of what does it mean to make sure that you keep your trash out of the stormwater system, how you can promote those practices, especially green infrastructure, to help infiltrate the water. So wherever, when storms do happen, it is infiltrating just like the hydrological cycle has done in the past development, and then inspiring investment, because stormwater and all of these things do need money to make happen. And so we have some PowerPoint presentations that stormwater managers and others can use to talk about their city officials and others who can invest in their community to protect the stormwater system and keep our waters clean. Another great resource, because this can get very technical, and it's important to have the pictures and the vision using some of these design concepts that we just put out this summer on how we can use green infrastructure to help communities address some of these natural hazards that are happening through wildfires or the extreme weather events such as flooding. And we talk about what can those solutions look like, whether it's creating healthy streams through a watershed approach or incorporating green infrastructure in the urban environment. And so I recommend you all Googling disaster resilient design concepts, EPA, and taking a look at the way that we visually have shown how you can engage others who are not as technically savvy or just need to get up to speed on what those could look like so that they can start thinking about how to plan in their community. The other thing is, once you realize where the problems are and what the solutions are, a lot of times you do still need tools to be able to measure the costs and benefits and the performance of green infrastructure. There is plenty of evidence out there already, but having the actual numbers, especially if you're applying for some grants or funding, which I'll get into in a second, is important. And we have these free tools. And so this is an EPA Green Infrastructure Modeling Toolkit that is at different scales, at different complexity, but the stormwater management model is something that has been used for regulatory purposes, as well as the watershed management optimization support tools. So you can see how you can get that performance with some green infrastructure, other stormwater measures. And then we also have some screening level tools. The National Stormwater Calculator can look at parcel level, as well as our community enabled life cycle analysis, which I really like because it's web-based. You can just create a polygon wherever through this web-based GIS system. You don't need to be an expert in that, but you can also project out to what would the climate look like differently and how would that change your estimates. And it also can give you those life cycle analysis costs and benefits, as well as some of the co-benefits of not just the stormwater retention, but also heat island and other things that are important to people that we want to be able to show and quantify. So funding and financing, this is where I was asked to really speak on that because EPA has received a historical amount level of funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law is what I'll start with, and then I'll move on to the Inflation Reduction Act. But this law has, you can see here on the screen, the number of programs for protecting our waters in the US and keeping them clean, and then helping communities be more resilient and sustainable by whether it's the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Now, those are traditional funding sources that we've had for many, many years. And the money that goes to EPA for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or SRF, and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund gets funneled through EPA to states. So if there's something where you are looking to get a loan, and many of these loans through the bipartisan infrastructure law could also be forgivable loans, which means they could turn into a grant where you don't have to pay it back, especially if you're designated as a quote unquote disadvantaged community or a community that's been under-resourced based on what your state law says. Then the state is the one, so it would be like the Massachusetts DEP or whoever your state agency is that is managing the environmental programs there. They're the ones that are administering the money and are the ones that you would need to talk to apply for that. But we have many other, so there, if you haven't done that before, especially when it comes to, since I'm the green infrastructure lead, I'm all about making sure that we are greening our cities and bringing back nature so that we can soak up the rain in the places where it's raining, and we can reduce the flooding that's happening. So one of the things that has been a barrier is the just getting started, having some of the technical resources that you need. And so our water TA, so waterTA@epa.gov is the email address, or you can go to the Water TA EPA and you can see how you can apply for technical assistance. We have technical assistance providers across the US, and University of Maine system is the one in the New England area, but there also are national providers like US Water Alliance and the National Rural Water Association that are helping. And not only is it to help you get the money, which we can't guarantee, but we can get you to the door, is this plan development of assisting how do you, if you haven't done any holistic planning before, where you've looked at your green infrastructure opportunities, or you've looked at integrating both stormwater and wastewater and thinking about how you can prioritize those investments over a long period of time, or maybe you need to do a vulnerability analysis or watershed management plan. All of those things are applicable projects that you can ask for technical assistance to get you started with knowing exactly what those projects should look like or could look like to benefit your community the most. Asset management is a big hurdle and it's a need for stormwater when it comes to developing maps of stormwater and wastewater systems. You know, some communities just don't know where all of their stormwater systems are because they are decentralized. And so having that knowledge is extremely important to be able to then know what projects you need or how you can invest in upgrading your infrastructure. Operation and maintenance plans are also eligible under the technical assistance. So even though you can't fund your maintenance through the Clean Water SRF, but you can fund creating a plan so that you can do your maintenance and figure out how you can sustainably fund that. So wanted to let you guys know this is out there, and you just need to contact the Water TA EPA.gov. We also have a form that takes about 3 minutes to fill out, and then they're triaging the requests. I wanted to let you guys know about what the New England states are already doing, because New England is a leader in funding climate resilience and green infrastructure. And there was a requirement in 2009 that 10% of money that goes to the states goes through this green project reserve. And so you can see here on this map of how much cumulative spending has been spent already on green infrastructure to help communities be more sustainable and resilient across the US. But I just had this map here for the New England states and resiliency and climate change projects are being prioritized in the New England states. So I have a list of, so for example, Maine has spent already $5.2 million on resiliency projects. This is on top of the Green Project Reserve. Massachusetts has spent $160 million on climate change and resiliency projects. New Hampshire has spent 19 million, and Rhode Island has spent 18 million funded through the Clean Water SRF project since 2022 alone. So this is in addition to all of this historical funding that has already been spent on resilient, getting communities to be more resilient. Connecticut, sorry, not Kentucky, wrong region. In Connecticut, the Clean Water SRF has a resiliency project reserve that is first come, first serve on a rolling basis. So all projects receive funding from the reserve get a 20% grant and an 80% loan. The Connecticut Drinking Water SRF has established an emergency power generator program due to the potential widespread and prolonged power outages caused by severe weather. So that is another streamlined procurement that you can get in the drinking water SRF program. And the Maine Clean Water SRF is providing additional subsidy to encourage the development of climate adaptation plans, allowing up to $20,000 per applicant. And this has been very successful so far. So that is another thing. If you're in Maine, you can apply for that. It's a statewide 4-year plan for climate action. Maine won't wait, developed by the Maine Climate Council in December of 2020. The So there's a lot of great stuff going on, which is very exciting that the New England states are taking this and running with it to make sure that money is getting dispersed through EPA to states, and the dedicated programs for resiliency is happening. So those are just a couple examples. So moving on to the Inflation Reduction Act. This is another historical investment that EPA received over $41 billion in appropriation to support 24 new programs or existing programs. And we're expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in the year 2030 because of the money that we're infusing into the economy to get more green jobs and to clean up our systems so that we're producing less greenhouse gas emissions, as well as helping green infrastructure, which is really great about this, is that when you build more urban trees, when you're reforesting, when you're doing riparian corridors, you're not only pulling carbon out of the air, you're also adapting to climate change. So you get a twofer for that. You're able to mitigate climate impacts because you're sequestering carbon, as well as helping with the extreme weather events and reducing erosion and bringing more green to the communities to help with that vitalization. So in terms of the money that I wanted to focus on today is the climate pollution reduction grants. So this, and then the greenhouse gas reduction fund. So this is a two-phased approach, and there are already video presentations out there. So I mean, I could spend a whole hour just explaining to you what this is all about. So for this quick summary, there are formula grants that have been put out to the states. All of the New England states have received a formula grant, and there are larger cities like I looked it up this morning. So like Massachusetts, Transportation Bay Authority, MBTA, they have received some money for doing planning. So the first step is the plans. Even if a state or a larger municipality, so like a Boston area, for example, and there's a few others, I don't have all of them listed, but it's going to be very important for you to talk to your governors and talk to the cities, the larger cities in your area, and ask them, have you got planning grants information? And if you want certain things to be funded in terms of implementation, which is phase 2, then those projects need to be in the plans that are submitted to EPA by March of next year. So that is important. So at least one grant will go to eligible entity in every state. And once those plans are submitted to EPA, and even if you've already had a climate change plan for many, many years, you just need to rework it, resend it back with the information that's required under the climate pollution grants program, and then you can be receiving capitalized new grants that you can invest in those emission reduction projects at the state and local level, and so you'll also get money for implementation. So this is a great time to partner and collaborate. The other grant opportunity that I wanted to mention is these environmental and climate justice block grants. And the reason why I'm talking about these is because green infrastructure, trees, other nature-based solutions are all eligible under these types of programs. So you can, for the environmental and climate justice block grants, this is dedicated for under-resourced communities, communities of color that really, really need the support to reduce the hazards of climate change and greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so there's $3 billion going out for that, and notice of funding opportunity is coming out very soon. It could be before the end of this year, so it's coming out very soon, and look out for that. And there's already technical assistance that is available. Oh, by the way, Jeffrey Butinsky from EPA is the climate contact for the climate pollution reduction grants. So you can contact him if you have questions about that, or you can go, there's a lot of resources on the website. There's also technical assistance available. But back to the environmental climate justice block grants, we have technical assistance already out there for applying for these grants or applying for any grants that could help with reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to climate change. So we have the Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, otherwise known as TICTACs. So that's the new acronym. We're always creating new ones every day, I feel like. These, if you go to the website, I don't think it's up yet, but probably within the next month or two, there will be a form that you can fill out that should be less than 5 minutes to fill out. And you can ask for assistance for, if you're a community-based organization or you're working with one, how to prepare a grant proposal. This is like basic 101 stuff, because we've heard that getting in the door and building that capacity to identify the funding sources, managing the federal grants, just navigating the sam.gov website is a barrier, because you have 1 or 2 people running like a whole program, and they don't have that expertise, which is totally understandable. So we're trying to build that capacity across the United States for these communities that really need it the most. And this is an opportunity for you all to check out. I also run a green infrastructure federal collaborative of over 15 other federal agencies. We have like 120 members, and we put together this navigating federal funding for green infrastructure and other nature-based solutions. And so I have a scan me here if you want to scan that and see how what are all of the different funding opportunities across the federal government that we're aware of. And so EPA has many of them, which are shown here. So a few of those are, you could get a brownfields grant, and they have a great workforce development grant program there. You could also revitalize the brownfields area and turn it into a greener area, doing the right procedures and cleaning it up. We have the Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Reuse Municipal Grant Program, also fondly known as OSG. There's $3.7 million allocated to the New England states alone for this Sewer Overflow Stormwater Reuse Grant Program. So I would contact your state representative, probably the person who also runs the state revolving fund, and tell them, hey, I'm interested in understanding how I can apply for the Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Reuse Municipal Grant, and tell them that you want to know more information at your state DEP or whatever your environmental protection agency is in your state. There's also Section 319 non-point source grants. So the non-point source program is an incentive program to help with managing water and pollution that's not under an MS4. And so those, you could look and see if there are 319 grants available in your area to do watershed-based planning or other types of green infrastructure that are outside the municipalities that are regulated through our municipal stormwater program. So take a look at this. What this does is it tells you whether planning and design, implementation and construction, operation and maintenance, or monitoring are funded or not. And you can see that, you know, the first 2 columns are obviously funded very strongly through the federal government. And then operation and maintenance is not so much. But there was a new report that came out that talked about how establishing your plants and making sure that the plants will be healthy through the lifetime of the project, such as a rain garden or like you're doing a bioretention system, that could be covered under your implementation or construction, but you need to talk to your state about how to create that eligibility so that it doesn't turn into the long-term operation and maintenance. So wanted to just point that out as a way to get money funded to you to have during this establishment period of your plants when you're doing green infrastructure, it could be covered under your implementation or construction, but you do need to talk to your state about that. So that gives you another 2 years to then figure out how your long-term operation and maintenance will happen. And stormwater utilities is a great way to get that sustainable funding. So I just wanted to touch on a couple other things, because there might be some students in the audience or some academics in the audience, and we want to build this next generation of workforce. That's another need that we've heard, is that we need qualified people who have the passion and education to do this kind of stuff. And Campus Rainworks Challenge is a program that EPA runs in my shop. We manage this one, and it's been going on for 11 years. The Campus Rainworks Challenge is a design challenge that is providing a $50,000 prize money for winners at different universities that are submitting entries to EPA about how they can design green infrastructure and build a more climate resilient campus through an interdisciplinary team that gets pulled together through the students at the college, as well as having a faculty advisor. And we have a criteria where we judge each of the entries that come in. We normally get, I want to say, maybe like 40 or so participants every year. And right now, team registration, it will be open in January. So we've announced it. Everything's on the website. If you go to Campus Rainworks Challenge at EPA, you can find the competition brief and start talking to your students and maybe an advisor to see if you can start building a team and register in January. And then you have until May of next year to submit your design concept to us, and we will judge it, and there will be winners and prize money will be distributed. So check it out. If you have questions, you can email rainworks@epa.gov. The 2020 Campus Rainworks winner was at UPenn, and I just wanted to point this out. This was a really cool project because the UPenn folks, what they did is you can do something on your campus, or you can do something on a campus nearby. And so they worked with a elementary school in a under-resourced community in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia, and they helped. Their design concept was to build planter beds with food so that the students could learn how to manage and grow food in their campus. And then there was some stormwater management there as well to help reduce some of the impervious surface that the school had to pay for because of a stormwater fee for the Philadelphia properties. And so this is Renewable from the UPenn team, and she talked about what she learned doing this Campus Rainworks design competition, and they also were able to get funding to get it implemented, and that you can see the students, they're excited about that. The last two I'll talk about is, again, building the workforce. We currently have this grant opened at EPA. It's an Innovative Water Infrastructure Workforce Development Grant with over $20 million in grant funding for eligible organizations. And those eligible organizations would be, academic institutions or institutions that are providing training to workforce to help build a stronger pool of skilled and diverse workers in the water and wastewater sector. The green infrastructure is an eligible training for this across the water sector. So there's 6 different project areas that you can check out. And a lot of it is targeting internships and apprenticeships or education programs, or doing some regional workforce development collaborations. You could be doing leadership development or occupational training, or developing your own training program or curriculum. Or there could be workforce development that could reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutants, because there is some IRA funding that has been dedicated to this program. So that's due November 17th. And then lastly, there's a Center for Excellence for Stormwater Infrastructure Technologies grant program. This was authorized in the fiscal year 23 budget we're working internally to get this completely new grant program up and running. There's going to be $3 million available for this, and we'll probably award, 3 to 5 awardees will get this money. And again, the eligibility are academic institutions, or, well, basically you have to, once the RFA comes out, you will be able to see for the request for applications. But it's a lot of research and analyzing innovative financial programs, or there's technical assistance you could provide. There could be establishing and maintaining National Electronic Clearinghouse Center to collect stormwater data and disseminate it. Or there could be some collaboration of other educational institutions. So this is definitely something for the academia to look into, or other nonprofits that will be eligible. So this will be coming soon, and check out the epa.gov/grants for information. Right now I don't have a date, but we are working really hard. It's in the review process, and hopefully it will be out very soon. That's it for me. We're looking forward to the panel discussion, and this is my information. If you have questions, I do also encourage you to reach out to people in the New England region. EPA does have a New England office in Boston who cover all of the New England states. We do have a Greenstream listserv, and on that listserv, we send out training opportunities and new resources that EPA is providing. Like, for example, we're about to put out a bioretention design handbook. So that will go on our Greenstream listserv. So all you have to do is email join-greenstream@list.epa.gov, and then you'll automatically be added. And we don't send things out too often, just maybe like once every couple of weeks. So thank you for listening. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Robyn, for your remarks today. We are now going to go and transition over to our panel discussion. There are awesome questions teed up in the chat for that. Carolyn Norkowitz is going to be moderating today's panel discussion. Caroline is the Greater Boston Regional Coordinator for the MVP program. She works with the municipalities on local climate change adaptation planning and implementation projects. And she also connects MVP grantees with resources and local partners to support an equitable and holistic approach to building climate resilience. So Carolyn, over to you to get things kicked off for our panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I really appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming this morning. And thank you to all of our speakers, for being flexible with our format. Again, cue, adaptation, pun. I really appreciate the diversity of the speakers that we've pulled together today. We've covered lessons learned from a policy planning and programmatic perspective at the state level, to technical lessons learned when it comes to adapting the water energy nexus to our ever-changing needs in the face of climate change. And then finally wrapping up with green infrastructure and funding opportunities that we have in order to start addressing these broad climate adaptation challenges and more. So I have one question to get us started, and then I've been collecting the questions that have been coming through in the chat, so then I will prompt the answering to those questions. But first, to kind of come back to our overarching theme, I'd love to hear more about our challenges and how they can become opportunities. So, with time, we can see how our greatest challenges can transform into really wonderful opportunities to move our work forward. What's one challenge that you've faced recently in your work that is becoming or has become an exciting opportunity to advance that work in climate adaptation? Does anyone on the panel have thoughts they'd like to start with?
Yeah, I could start. Go ahead, Mia.
Sure. So I would say one of the things that came to mind, Carolyn, was sort of a general challenge of how to engage other partners in this work. And specifically in my experiences around other agencies and secretariats in state government, and especially those that, are less focused on this, don't have a direct mandate on it, don't have the the staff sort of capacity or focus, and how to bring those players in, because they are the ones who are need to implement this work, whether it be on their own sort of infrastructure or through their own programs or their own sort of levers. That's definitely another overarching challenge of climate adaptation, is that it touches sort of like every topic possible in some way. And so I think kind of how we've been approaching that at the state, one way is through, this Resilient Mass Action Team, this interagency working group. And through that, we've been able to identify some key staff in different agencies who are personally very interested and invested and passionate in this work, and through their personal commitment have been able to bring their teams and agencies to the table and identify projects and start projects, and we can work with them to move their work forward. And so, for example, there are really strong partners within housing and livable communities through which we've helped to identify funding to support their 197 housing authorities that need resiliency improvements. And so they're like top of mind whenever there's funding around how can we help support their projects. In economic development, there's partners that are coming to the table to help us do work on looking at, the building code, for example. This is things that we wouldn't have the same sort of leverage and insight into if we weren't within those actual agencies. And then, and similar within EEAs, a lot of the questions that have been asked already, they're touching on topics that, I or one person cannot sort of be fully involved with, but they require these other partners to, to know them, to, know who they are, know what they're working on, know what their priorities are, and be able to connect those priorities and interests into sort of goals and strategies related to adaptation. So that's sort of a general and ongoing challenge we have, and things we're continuously working on to create and sort of cultivate these partnerships.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maya. Any other thoughts on recent challenges that have turned out to be really exciting opportunities?
Yeah, Carolyn, I'll support the one that I had talked about real quick on the technical side, in that I had mentioned how, for instance, with autonomous controls, that some regulators were more comfortable, for instance, with bringing in technology like that, so that more that if they had comfort in the risk of something happening, a public health risk, where they actually said, hey, let's engage this kind of technology to shut down the system in case we do see something like that. I was actually quite surprised at that willingness to use that kind of technology. It wasn't an interpretation I thought that would come out of that, but was also kind of exciting in that they said, yeah, this makes us feel more comfortable that we are protecting our public health, and that we are able to incorporate those kinds of adaptive controls into these systems, which, again, I from a regulatory perspective, I found that a little bit surprising, but encouraging.
Great, thank you.
I think that a challenge that I've been holding that's also an opportunity is that everybody wants to talk about engagement right now, and every grant program is requiring engagement, which is a great thing, but also leads to many different people engaging the same people around many different things, and it can lead to confusion, overburden, and exhaustion on a variety of people's experiences. And so it's something that I'm holding very closely, of how is it that we engage in a way that is reciprocal and is actually about building relationships, so that we're not just going out and seeking information without going out with the same intention and weight to be listening to the people about whatever their concerns are, if regardless of whether or not they're actually immediately related to what it is that we think that we want to be talking about. So, and then helping, my various colleagues across, different agencies and departments sort of think through what is it that we mean by engagement, and sort of replacing engagement more with a concept of relationship building and not just about information flow, and how do we center reciprocity in that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Robyn, any additional thoughts to add?
Yeah, well, I think my topic of funding and financing was the top of my mind, because for many years, and still now, the challenge is, how do we get these projects funded? And there's been, because we have all of this historic money going to EPA and other federal agencies to build a resilient water infrastructure and help with our aging infrastructure and deal with climate change. This is a great opportunity. And now we have to take that opportunity and figure out how to get that money to the people who really need it. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out, and would be happy to hear people's ideas on making sure that, forums like these and other places where we can connect to the communities that need the money and get them to the right resources is where I'm at this moment, because there is now money available, and we need to just talk to the people who really need to grab onto it and give them the capacity building so that they can use the money that's out there in this historical, exciting time. Many of the funds are going to be available for the next 5 years, and so let's get on it and make sure that everybody knows how to access it and help them access that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Money is definitely a huge opportunity, but can be a challenge in figuring out how to distribute it, manage it, equitably and productively. Absolutely. Thank you all for those initial thoughts. Do any members of the panel have any questions they wanted to ask each other as peers, as folks who have been kind of discussing these in our lead up to this forum?
I had one question for Oleander. It was sort of a bit of a question related to, I think one Pallavi put earlier in the chat around incorporating Indigenous voices and practices. And I wanted to sort of ask Oleander that, because they are very skilled and have sort of a gift there in terms of cultivating tribal partnerships. And this has been evident in MVP. And I was just sort of interested in asking them your approach to that, and any sort of lessons learned there.
Thanks for the question, Maya. It's a good one. And so for those who don't know, the MVP program this past year changed our eligibility to be able to include tribes as eligible entities for both our planning and our action grants. And in this round, we had 2 tribes, one apply for MVP 2.0 and one for an action grant. And I think that it's really, back to sort of also this question of like, where are our challenges and where are our growth edges and learning. We are very familiar with working with municipalities, and those are really established relationships. And I think that being able to sort of look around at the conversations that any of us are involved in at any given point and sort of see who isn't there is always a really important skill. And understanding that we are all living on somebody's homelands, and that when we talk about nature-based solutions, that indigenous land management, traditional ecological knowledge, that these are the foundations of so much of what it is that we're trying to think through. And so where are the opportunities to uplift the work that's already happening, in terms of specifically, the question is about indigenous communities, but then, we going back to sort of what I was saying in terms of the challenge of engagement, we've had many municipalities in MVP who have then tried to want to work with indigenous communities whose homeland they're on. And how do we forge relationships that aren't tokenizing? What does that look like? What does it mean? And my experience so far has been to continue to show up over time and learn different communities' needs and what their priorities are, which is very similar to the work that I think that I've been doing as a regional coordinator for the Berkshires and Hill Towns. It's just, taking those listening skill sets and applying it to a different community that's not a municipality. And then trying, I think that the regional coordinators are always listening to challenges that may not have to do with adaptation and resiliency. So, while those conversations and those needs may not seem readily apparent how they might relate to your work at first, a year, a few months down the line, you may hear about a funding program or somebody who's trying to do something, and like learning how to make those connections and understand people's priorities is really helpful. But that it is incredibly necessary for us all to be thinking about whose homelands we're working on and how do we center what their needs are by taking the first step of learning what those priorities are.
Thank you, Maya, for the question, and Oleander for the response. I know it's definitely been top of mind for MVP. So with that, I'd like to turn to some of the audience questions that I've been gathering from the chat. Kind of as a related question to that important question about Indigenous voices and practices that Pallavi Monday had asked in the chat. Another question was specifically for Dr. Struck, but happy to, of course, have Maya or Robyn or jump in. Thinking about how social resilience strategies are being incorporated across, specifically the case studies that Dr. Struck presented, but, Robyn's work as well, if anything comes to mind. Yeah, how are we thinking about social resilience in these broader federal research and programs?
It's an excellent question. I would say we always try to have an element of that. So similar to what Oleander said in terms of all of our grants requiring some type of outreach, which of course helps it to be sustainable, but both in terms of getting the local communities to take ownership and own and operate these systems. That's one of the most critical pieces, is that they're involved along the process, even including, for instance, in selecting the technologies that are used. As an example, that's very similar to what was just described is that we've worked on the Navajo reservation, where again, if you think about the context there, oftentimes they are driving 30, 40, 50 miles to get a water supply, and then bringing it back to their home. So we've developed some rainwater harvesting systems that can be used more on a local or even regional basis, but really working with the community to understand what their needs are, what their cultural views of for instance, of water harvesting. I mean, it is, of course, just what Oleander said, that they've been doing these practices for eons, and we come in with these technologies, and we think that they're new to them, and oftentimes they have better practical experience with them than we know and appreciate. And so really working with the Navajo Nation, we were able to really select the types of systems that would work best, the type of powering. For instance, if there was a more of a regional system that we were distributing the water to other community members, a lot of their questions were how often is it available? Is it, what's my water pressure going to be? Is it going to be similar to other systems, et cetera? And so really listening to those requests and those concerns, helping the systems fit into the environment better, so they weren't necessarily just a steel tank that's sitting out in the back or something like that was also important. How they felt about, for instance, even the treatment of their water. Do they want a chlorinated system, as an example? A lot of them didn't want to have a chlorine residual taste in there. And so those kinds of questions needed to be asked and listened to really help in that particular context for that to be a successful, sustainable type of project. When we move more towards urban or peri-urban type of systems, some of the same aspects need to be done where there's a lot more listening, and sometimes that's hard for a researcher to come in and think, well, of course we are coming in with a solution that we think will fit best, but is that the right solution for for those for that community, and even more specifically for the utility or operator? Oftentimes there's a hesitancy to go to a more complex system because an operator might not feel comfortable, operating that in the future. And so really working with the utility to make sure that they're comfortable with the types of technologies that are going in. And quite honestly, the other concern, I had mentioned some of the advantages of autonomous controls and those types of systems, making sure that they don't feel like they're getting left out of those, and we're not displacing employees with that there still is a huge importance for a human in the loop in those, and so making sure we're including those aspects and demonstrating why they're important in the long-term functional operation of those systems is really critical.
Thank you. It's always helpful to hear, particularly from a very technical perspective, how we're thinking about resilience. Anything else to add about social resilience from our panelists?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that, like, as a society, I mean, this could feel like a daunting task because we are overcoming and reversing hundreds of years of inequitable practices and attitudes. So, as practitioners, we to be deeply authentic and committing to this change in the future for the better, it's extremely important. And there's been a lot of good documents and information to help stormwater managers and utilities and people who want to help be more equitable and advance that equity aspect when it comes to green infrastructure. And I think green infrastructure can be a powerful lever for advancing equity. So because when you're bringing more green into the community, you're expanding nature, you're helping with the mental health aspects of it, the physical health aspects of it. And so you have this more visible green space that could create all of these benefits. And then in terms of the resilience to climate hazards, the low income communities and communities of color are disproportionately impacted. So when we the Justice 40 initiative that was developed through the executive order with the Biden administration, he's directed that our programs that are providing funding, 40% of what we put out there is going to these communities that really are being disproportionately affected by flooding and drought and water pollution, extreme heat. And that if we include, like what was just said, is we need to listen more. Obviously, we need to think about what the community needs and increase that community participation and power, because every opportunity that we work with, invite the community members to the table and make decisions, it's putting the future in their hands.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another question that was asked towards the beginning, but continues on an aspect of social resilience, is food security. So someone had asked, about where is the food system kind of being addressed in, it was initially in response to Maya's presentation on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts adaptation planning, but Dr. Struckmet talked about agriculture in his presentation. So any additional thoughts on food security and how we are considering it in the field of climate adaptation?
Yeah, I could start. That is a great question, and another partnership we're working to strengthen at EEA with MDAR, the Department of Agricultural Resources, that are really, obviously taking the lead on connections with climate resiliency impacts and what they, experienced this past year, but also sort of before that. The two main sort of programs at MDAR are the Climate Smart Agriculture Program and the Food Security Infrastructure Grant Program. So both are very large and growing grant programs that are targeting one, the food supply chain in Massachusetts, and then the other working with individual agricultural operations on assessing climate risks and implementing different types of solutions. And both of those programs are growing. Within the climate assessment, there's specific focuses on marine fisheries impacts and agriculture productivity impacts, and specific sort of recommendations and analyses there. And so I recommend sort of reading those analyses and also looking at the Resilient Mass Action Tracker, sorting by different sectors and agencies to see the different actions that are being put forward. But those two grant programs are sort of the big focus areas there.
Yeah, and as far as the Department of Energy and how they've been looking at food security, it is actually a big portion of some programs. So, for instance, trying to address food deserts and where people have access to fresh agricultural goods is really being viewed as a priority. With that, of course, goes the aspect of the water energy nexus and what I discussed. One is for instance taking out that transportation piece of it, so that we can decarbonize that whole system, where we're not transferring things from either around the globe or even from places like California and Arizona, and trying to provide more within our urban centers. Again, especially trying to address some of the food deserts. One of the challenges is the types of vegetables and greens and so forth that can be grown in that situation. So working more towards the development of the vertical agricultural systems. We've been working with a couple that have started in terms of trying to optimize their energy and water use, for instance, to consider both the discharge and water quality that comes out of that, but also reuse within the system, and trying to take advantage of, for instance, fertilizers are already within the water system that can be reused and reapplied to the next crop that would be grown. But there are challenges that go along with that intensified agricultural space in terms of water quality and discharge. So it's definitely something that's being focused on, so that we can try to provide some solutions and get some lessons learned in that side of food security and providing better local food for people.
Great, thanks for addressing that again, or going back to your agricultural discussion. Oleander, Robyn, anything to add about agricultural systems and our food systems before I move on to the next question? It's okay if the answer is no. Okay, great. Thank you. We've had a few different questions about water in Massachusetts and also more broadly. So I was just spending some time trying to put them together into one more overarching question for us. You know, our water systems in Massachusetts specifically, but also across the country, are certainly being challenged by climate change hazards such as sea level rise and intense rain events, which further aggravate existing nutrient loading and other pollutant problems. So there are some questions around how can we encourage novel solutions to these really significant problems? Are there thoughts of looking at our regulatory landscape to figure out how we can better address these, ways in which our regulatory landscape have maybe prohibited some more novel solutions at this point? So I'd like to start with Maya and Oleander from the Massachusetts perspective, since some of those questions were specifically geared towards Massachusetts. But then I'd be happy to open it up to Robyn and Scott as well.
Yeah, I can definitely start there. There's so much there. I think, let's see, there's sort of a range of different efforts that, touch that very broad and critical topic. I think sort of from the data side, to start there, there's new efforts within Mass Wildlife and other agencies. They recently put out the Biomap 3 model that is really prioritizing looking at habitats and management and restoration. There's also significant efforts around dam removals, culvert redesigns, culvert replacements, and those impacts stretching from DCR, looking at sort of assessments across their portfolio, municipal focuses as well, and then new funding and grants to those types of projects. On the sort of salt marsh and wetlands restoration side, there's a lot of conversations right now. That's definitely a very hot topic within the agencies, with the climate office across EEA on permitting pathways, on current challenges, on how to sort of move that conversation forward. There's also recently a really large grant proposal put forward for the NOAA Coastal Resilience Regional Challenge that we're hoping to hear back from as soon as tomorrow, if we're advancing to the next step. Not that it was funded, advancing to the next step, but that was a huge grant application focused on salt marsh restoration largely, and land acquisition and projects along the Massachusetts coast, focused on marsh migration and ecological restoration and risk reduction to communities. So there's sort of a number of different efforts underway. Those are just sort of touching the surface of this topic, not to mention the sort of overarching policy frameworks that are going to be kicked off soon on the coastal side, and both on the sort of floodplain management across the state side as well, led by CZM and DCR and the Office of Economic Development as well.
The only thing that I would add to that is that the incredible work that the regional planning associations across the state that they are doing in terms of because they're thinking from a very regional perspective about our water resources, and they're embedded in our communities, that a variety of them are also thinking about the challenges that they're facing to permitting various innovative nature-based solutions or other, different types of techniques of thinking about our water issues, and that they are a great group of people to be engaging with, depending on what types of projects or things that you're interested in doing, but just really to remember that they are also a great partner to consider in these conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that. At a similar note, there was a specific question about like drainage ditches and the ways in which those interfere with agriculture, as well as thinking about sea level rise, storm surge, more powerful storms, and what our hardscape needs are, as well as those nature-based solutions. So I kind of want to put these questions to Robyn and or Dr. Struck about specifically thinking about nature-based solutions. I'm sorry, nature-based and gray infrastructure solutions for sea level rise, as well as the issue of the drainage issues in agriculture.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to also touch on the last question as well, real quickly. Is just in terms of being innovative, and I work in the stormwater permitting world. So one of the things I did want to tell people, and this does address both like how to deal with water quality when you might be in an area that's not quote unquote permitted right now for under the municipal stormwater permit. So it could deal with rural or agriculture areas. And I was going back and forth a little bit with the commenter in the chat about where exactly he was talking about. And because it does matter. It matters if you are already regulated through a municipal stormwater permit, also called MS4, then you do have 6 minimum control measures that you are required to, the municipality is required to implement. But we know that in the non-point source area, the areas that are not currently being managed through that permitting program, that's in especially agriculture, like that is where a lot of the water pollution is coming from, and there's flooding happening. And so most recently, EPA Region 1, the New England region, has announced as of it was September of last year, but maybe people haven't heard about it, is this EPA does have this residual designation authority under the Clean Water Act that that we can use. We received a petition, and that there were things happening within the Charles River watershed, the Mystic River watershed, and the Neponset watershed, where there was we need to control the stormwater and the flooding that's unregulated right now for stormwater pollution that's entering unchecked into these watersheds in the Charles, Mystic, and Neponset. And so for the first time ever, EPA is exercising its residual designation authority, is what it's called, RDA, under the Clean Water Act. And this is the first time we've done it at such a broad scale to address these watersheds in major urban areas to dramatically improve the water quality throughout these watersheds. And so there will be some permitting and of acres that are 1 acre or more of impervious surface that will have to figure out how to control that stormwater on those properties so that they can clean up the watersheds. And so I just wanted to mention that it's happening in the New England area, and that should help with improving those watersheds because we're now controlling the stormwater there. But in terms of green infrastructure and gray infrastructure, I mean, I think a hybrid approach is always the way to go to think about, because you need the pipes. You need to think about how old the pipes are, and if they are able to control the amount of water that's going in them so they're not overflowing. But then also the green infrastructure piece of it is, there's a coastal part, which I don't have as much background on, so I can let others speak up to that. But on the urban scale, if we can reduce the amount of water that's going into our pipes and flooding in our streets, then obviously that's what we need to do, because green infrastructure can treat the water and help it slow down the flow. So bioretention practices are very, very common and can be very helpful. But if you have areas that you don't have a lot of room, I did a presentation, and Jamie Houle from the Stormwater Center up in New Hampshire, he was talking about how if you just did vegetated strips of grass that had high infiltration soils, that could be just as beneficial as having a rain garden, and you have less maintenance on the sides of the roads. So it's really needs to be that engagement that was spoken earlier on, how you can maintain it, and where you can get the sustainable funding, and what kind of space you have to be able to get to there. Because some people, knowing who's managing it is extremely important. And sometimes people are passing the buck, like, no, I want it to be DOT. No, I want it to be the the utility. And so those conversations up front, and then also the community members, all need to happen so that you can have those very sustainable systems across the jurisdiction.
Great, thank you very much. And I saw that, Scott, you put some helpful information in the chat.
Yeah, I did. I put this connection to the Engineering with Nature, the part of ERDIC, the research center with Army Corps of Engineers. And just to add to that, I think that there's been perspectives in the past where nature and for instance, hardscapes don't necessarily go well together. As an example, a lot of times levees are often kept unvegetated other than grass, so no trees, for instance, on levees, because of the concern of trees having blowdown and creating pockets and weaknesses in a levee, for instance. But there's some examples even on that website where researchers have gone through and looked at the risk of that happening versus the benefit that that vegetation, that trees, for instance, can provide, shading, some cooling of the water, things like that, that really suggests that we need to think about the balance of that risk that those things create in terms of having a nature-based solution as opposed to a hardscape versus the benefits that they provide. Another example that I had actually given in my presentation about rainwater harvesting in the city of Austin, the original volumetric goal that had to be attained for that volume of storage in those systems in Austin was something like the 10-year level or it was something like it had to be able to match or supplement the worst drought on record. Well, the volumes that were necessary to actually meet that were so large that creating a tank, the costs were just not realistic. And so then the question came, well, what is the purpose? Is it to really prevent from having the next drought or having water available in there for the next drought? Or is it to supplement the purpose of having that water in the first place so that we're supplementing our water supply and can, for instance, come back to a different water supply, like a centralized system, as opposed to being completely separate. And so I think it's a really, there needs to be thoughtful balance between the requirements for those, for instance, in codes and regulations, as opposed to the benefits that we get from those systems.
Great, thank you. And so we only have a few more minutes before I'm going to hand it over to Jessamine to close it out. I'm going to because the very most recent question that was asked in the chat, those carry off nicely from the discussion that was that we were just having about gray versus green. Sometimes there are issues where there are more traditional solutions that folks feel are going to be working better, and that's really a priority for them in their town. And but we do have a lot of funding geared towards kind of newer, innovative solutions. Is there still room for kind of more tried and true traditional solutions to this wide variety of issues? Kind of while we're also trying to encourage newer approaches. Love to hear any thoughts on that dichotomy.
When you say tried and true, what do you mean?
So, great question.
What do you think? I guess one approach I think that was mentioned, which I think is instructive, is trying to determine what the requirements are, and can you step back the requirements in some way. The other way is we really need some very creative solutions to the combination of hardscape and softscape. One of the things that's been traditionally used in rivers is using stone where at the lower high velocity levels, and using vegetation, in this case vegetation with very strong roots that can provide the soil reinforcement that's necessary to protect banks and prevent severe erosion I particularly agree with the approach on the dams recently. Because of failures, the Army Corps required all the trees to be taken out off all these levees because of the problem with piping that's caused by roots creating passageways through the dams. But maybe if you have something that has smaller roots, I mean, these, in order to balance and incorporate all of the constraints, it's really going to require compromise and balancing so that both the hardscape needs to address, things like wave runoff, and the things that will destroy these types of more nature-based solutions to sea level rise. Whereas instead of one perspective trying to dominate the other perspective and the other design challenges.
Yeah, so I guess kind of going back to, thinking about room for keeping more gray and more hard infrastructure, while also trying to, where it's appropriate, while also trying to move more innovative nature-based solutions forward. We have reached 11:55, so I do want to make sure that we have room for our closeout today. But thank you to the panelists, thank you to the audience for all of your questions. Thank you for helping us kind of string all of these ideas together about these lessons learned on climate adaptation, and the wide variety of practices and approaches from nature-based to gray, to community engagement and including different voices. We've covered a lot this morning, so just thank you all for your continued engagement on this, and I'm going to turn it over to Jessamine.
All right. And I am then going to turn it back over to Anne, who has a couple of reminders and closing remarks to make, and then we will wrap things up and you can officially go out into the beautiful fall weather. So Anne.
Thanks, Jessamine. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here today. I know it's a long morning. I appreciate that you spent your time with the forum. A couple of little quick notes that we will have another forum on November 30th. And hopefully that will be hybrid, in person in the Seaport and also virtual. And it doesn't have a nice condensed catchy title yet, but the intention is to explore historical examples of successful quick mobilization to address critical environmental challenges. What does it take to shift a cultural mindset? So it'll be a really interesting forum, a nice look back at some other successes in history and what can we learn from them and use in the adaptation space. A couple of other notes that the presentations will be shared with you if you are a registered attendee, as well as the recording, and it will also all be posted to the website. So you'll get an email with links directly to you, as well as you can just check back on the website. There is a feedback survey in that email, so please let us know how this was today. You can also take the survey. There's a link in the chat right now that Jessamine just put in. Please leave us your thoughts and also your suggestions for future topics. We are an open book, so please send us your suggestions. We have an upcoming steering committee meeting where we can review those suggestions and make some decisions about our spring and I guess winter spring programming. I guess March is sort of spring, winter time. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next forum in November.